The sirens wailed through the quiet London suburb, shattering the peace of a crisp autumn morning. Detective Inspector Olivia Clark stepped out of her unmarked car, her eyes fixed on the modest two-story house before her. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, a stark contrast to the well-manicured lawn and neatly trimmed hedges. As she ducked under the tape, a young constable approached her, his face pale. "Ma'am, it's not pretty in there." Clark nodded grimly. After 15 years on the force, she thought she'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared her for what awaited inside 17 Willow Lane. The living room was immaculate, save for a single overturned lamp. Family photos lined the mantel, smiling faces that told a story of happiness and unity. Clark's gut twisted. How often had she seen such displays, only to uncover the darkness lurking beneath? She made her way upstairs, the wooden steps creaking under her weight. The bedroom door stood ajar, and the metallic scent of blood hit her before she even crossed the threshold. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Blood-splattered walls, shattered glass, and in the center of it all, a body. A man, young and athletic, lay face down in a pool of crimson. Multiple stab wounds marred his back, a testament to the fury of his attacker. Clark's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. A woman's robe discarded on a chair, 2 wine glasses on the nightstand. And there, half hidden under the bed, a glint of metal caught her eye. As she crouched down to examine it, her radio crackled to life. "Inspector Clark, we've got 2 more for questioning. The wife and daughter have just arrived." Clark stood, her mind already piecing together the puzzle. "Bring them in," she replied, her voice steady. "I have a feeling this is going to be a long day." Little did she know, she was about to unravel a web of secrets, lies, and betrayal that would shake the very foundations of this seemingly perfect family. The story of 17 Willow Lane was just beginning, and before it was over, it would expose the darkest corners of the human heart. The Adebayo family had always been the envy of Willow Lane. Dr. Emmanuel Adebayo, a respected cardiologist at St. Thomas's Hospital, was known for his brilliant mind and gentle bedside manner. His wife, Amara, was a successful interior designer whose work graced the pages of high-end magazines. Their daughter, Zara, at 19, was a promising law student at King's College London. To the outside world, they were the epitome of black excellence. A family that had overcome societal barriers to carve out their own slice of suburban paradise. Their dinner parties were legendary, their charity work admirable, and their home a showcase of Amara's impeccable taste. But, as Detective Inspector Olivia Clark was about to discover, the cracks in this perfect facade ran deep and dark. The day had started like any other for the Adebayos. Emmanuel had left for the hospital before dawn, kissing his sleeping wife goodbye. Amara had a client meeting in the afternoon, so she spent the morning in her home office, poring over fabric swatches and color palettes. Zara had lectures until late, but promised to be home for dinner. It wasn't until Emmanuel failed to return home that evening that the first hint of worry crept in. His phone went straight to voicemail, unusual for a man who prided himself on always being reachable. "He's probably caught up in surgery," Amara had reassured Zara, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her unease. As the hours ticked by, that unease blossomed into full-blown panic. Calls to the hospital revealed that Emmanuel had left early, citing a family emergency. But he had never made it home. It was nearing midnight when the doorbell rang. Amara rushed to answer it, hope and dread warring in her chest. But instead of her husband's familiar face, she found herself staring into the solemn eyes of Detective Inspector Clark. "Mrs. Adebayo?" Clark's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm afraid I have some bad news about your husband." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Amara listened to the detective's words. Emmanuel, found dead in a hotel room on the outskirts of London. Signs of a struggle, a potential crime of passion. Zara's anguished cry from behind her mother cut through the air like a knife. "No, Dad can't be. He can't be." As Clark watched the 2 women cling to each other, she couldn't help but notice the flicker of something else in Amara's eyes. Was it a shock, grief, or was it relief? The detective's instincts, owned by years on the force, prickled. There was more to this story than met the eye, and she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. Little did she know, the path ahead would twist and turn through a labyrinth of secrets, each more shocking than the last. The perfect family of Willow Lane was about to be exposed, and the fallout would be devastating. Detective Inspector Olivia Clark stood in the morgue, staring down at the body of Dr. Emmanuel Adebayo. The man who just yesterday had been a pillar of his community now lay cold and still under the harsh fluorescent lights. Cause of death? Clark asked, her voice echoing in the sterile room. Dr. Kemi Oladipo, the forensic pathologist, looked up from her clipboard. Multiple stab wounds to the back and chest. The fatal blow punctured his left lung. He would have died within minutes. Clark nodded, her eyes scanning the body. Any defensive wounds? Minimal, Oladipo replied. Whoever did this caught him by surprise, but there's something else. She gently lifted Emmanuel's right hand, pointing to his fingernails. We found traces of skin and blood under here. He fought back, even if briefly. A small smile tugged at Clark's lips. Evidence. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As she left the morgue, her phone buzzed. It was her partner, Detective Sergeant Isaac Osei. Clark, you need to get down to the station. Mrs. Adebayo is here, and she's asking to speak with you. The interview room was small and stark, a far cry from the luxurious home Amara Adebayo was used to. She sat ramrod straight in her chair, her face a mask of composure. But Clark had interviewed enough grieving widows to know that this woman's calm was far from natural. Mrs. Adebayo, Clark began, settling into the chair across from her. I'm sorry for your loss. Can you tell me about your relationship with your husband? Amara's eyes, rimmed with red but surprisingly dry, met Clark's. Emmanuel was a good man, a devoted father and husband. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we were happy. Clark nodded, her pen scratching across her notepad. And where were you yesterday afternoon, between 2 and 5 p.m.? A flicker of something, surprise, fear, crossed Amara's face before she smoothed it away. I had a client meeting in Chelsea. We were discussing the renovation of their townhouse. I can give you their contact information to verify. That would be helpful, thank you, Clark said, making a note. Mrs. Adebayo, I have to ask, did you know your husband was at the Oakwood Hotel yesterday? Amara's composure cracked just for a moment, her hand resting on the table, clenched into a fist. No, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea. As the interview continued, Clark couldn't shake the feeling that Amara was holding something back. Her answers were too polished, her grief too contained. But without concrete evidence, all Clark had was her gut instinct. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Sergeant Osei was knocking on doors in the quiet neighborhood surrounding the Oakwood Hotel. Most of the residents had little to offer. They'd seen nothing, heard nothing out of the ordinary. But as Osei was about to call it a day, an elderly woman with a small dog tugged at his sleeve. You're asking about yesterday afternoon? She said, her roomy eyes peering up at him. I remember seeing a young man, handsome lad, looked a bit like that actor on the telly. What's his name? Oh, never mind. He was arguing with someone in a car. Couldn't see who it was. Tinted windows, you know. But the boy seemed upset. Stormed off into the hotel, he did. Osei's interest peaked. Can you describe this young man? The woman squinted, thinking. Tall, athletic build, short hair, I think, and he was carrying a gym bag. That's all I remember, I'm afraid. My eyesight's not what it used to be. It wasn't much, but it was another piece of the puzzle. As Osei thanked the woman and headed back to his car, his phone rang. It was Clark. Isaac, I need you to look into Amara Adebayo's alibi. Something's not adding up. As the detectives delved deeper into the case, they were unaware that their investigation was about to uncover a tangled web of secrets that would shake the Adebayo family to its core. The perfect facade was beginning to crumble, and what lay beneath would shock even the most seasoned investigators. Zara Adebayo sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by remnants of a life that now seemed like a distant dream. Trophies from debate competitions lined the shelves, alongside framed photos of happier times, family holidays, her parents beaming with pride at her graduation. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Zara? It's Detective Clark. May I come in? Zara hesitated, then called out, Yes, come in. Clark entered, her eyes taking in the room before settling on Zara. The young woman looked exhausted, her usually immaculate braids disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. I know this is a difficult time, Clark began, her voice gentle. but I need to ask you a few questions about your father." Zara nodded, gesturing for the detective to take a seat at her desk chair. "What do you want to know? Can you tell me about your relationship with your dad? How things were between you recently?" A sad smile flickered across Zara's face. He was my hero. Always had been. He pushed me to be my best, supported my dreams. But lately, she trailed off, her brow furrowing. "Lately?" Clark prompted. Zara sighed. "Things had been tense. I overheard him arguing with Mom a few weeks ago. I couldn't make out what it was about, but I'd never heard him raise his voice like that before." Clark leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Do you know what the argument was about?" "No," Zara shook her head. "But after that, Dad started acting different. Distracted. He'd get these calls and step out of the room to answer them. And Mum, she started watching him like a hawk." As Clark jotted down notes, she noticed Zara fidgeting with her phone. "Is there something else, Zara? Anything at all that might help us understand what happened to your father?" Zara's eyes welled with tears. I don't know. It's just, the day before he died, I saw something I wish I hadn't." Clark waited patiently as Zara gathered her thoughts. "I came home early from uni. I was supposed to be in a lecture, but it got canceled. I thought the house was empty, but then I heard voices from upstairs. Dad's voice and someone else's." "Another woman?" Clark asked gently. Zara shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, a man. Young, from the sound of it. They were arguing. The man said something about ending it and telling the truth. Dad sounded scared. I'd never heard of him like that before." Clark's mind raced. This was new information, potentially crucial to the case. "Did you see this man, Zara?" "No," Zara replied, wiping away a tear. "I panicked and left before they could see me. I didn't tell anyone. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was just a patient Dad was counseling or something. But now you're not so sure," Clark finished for her. Zara nodded miserably. "I should have said something, shouldn't I? If I had, maybe Dad would still be—" Clark reached out, placing a comforting hand on Zara's arm. "This isn't your fault, Zara. You couldn't have known what would happen. But what you've told me could be very important. Is there anything else you remember? Anything at all about this man or what they were discussing?" Zara closed her eyes, concentrating. "The man, he mentioned a place, the Oak something. Oakwood? I can't remember exactly." Clark's heart raced. The Oakwood Hotel, where Emmanuel's body had been found. This was the connection they'd been looking for. As she thanked Zara and prepared to leave, Clark's mind was already piecing together the new information. A young man, an argument, the Oakwood Hotel. The picture was becoming clearer, but it was far from complete. What she didn't realize was that Zara was holding back one crucial piece of information. A secret that, if revealed, would tear her family apart even further. As the door closed behind the detective, Zara pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over a contact name, Tyler. With a shaky breath, she pressed delete, erasing the number from her phone. But she knew that erasing the truth wouldn't be nearly as easy. Detective Sergeant Isaac Osei stood outside the small flat in Brixton, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The neighbor's description of the young man at the Oakwood Hotel had led them here, to the home of Tyler Johnson, a 22-year-old personal trainer. Osei knocked firmly on the door. After a moment, it opened, revealing a tall, athletic young man with close-cropped hair and wary eyes. "Tyler Johnson?" Osei asked, flashing his badge. "I'm Detective Sergeant Osei. We need to talk about Dr. Emmanuel Adebayo." Tyler's face paled, his grip on the door tightening. For a moment, Osei thought he might slam it shut. But then, with a resigned sigh, Tyler stepped back. "I've been expecting you," he said quietly. "Come in." The flat was small but tidy, with fitness equipment tucked into corners and motivational posters on the walls. Tyler led Osei to a small kitchenette, gesturing for him to sit at the table. "I suppose you want to know what happened at the Oakwood," Tyler said, his voice steady but his hands shaking as he poured himself a glass of water. Osei nodded, pulling out his notebook. "That would be a good place to start." Tyler took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the table. "I met Emmanuel, Dr. Adebayo, at the gym about 6 months ago. He hired me as his personal trainer. We got close." Osei's eyebrows raised slightly, but he kept his voice neutral. "How close, Mr. Johnson?" Tyler looked up, meeting Osei's gaze. "We were lovers," he said simply. It started about 4 months ago. Emmanuel said he was unhappy in his marriage, that he and Amara had grown apart. He talked about leaving her, about us being together openly. Osei jotted down notes, his mind racing. This was a motive, not for Tyler, but potentially for Amara Adebayo. What happened at the Oakwood Hotel? Tyler's face crumpled, and for the first time, Osei saw the pain and fear behind his composed exterior. I ended it, he said, his voice breaking. I couldn't do it anymore. The sneaking around, the lies. I told Emmanuel it was over, that he needed to tell Amara the truth. How did he react? He begged me to reconsider. Said he'd leave Amara, that we could be together properly. But I'd heard it all before. I told him it was too late. Tyler paused, running a hand over his face. We argued. I left. That was the last time I saw him alive. Osei leaned forward. What time did you leave the hotel, Mr. Johnson? Around 4:30, I think. I wasn't really paying attention to the time. And where did you go after that? Tyler swallowed hard. I went to a bar. Drown my sorrows. I've got receipts, and the bartender will remember me. I was there until closing. Osei made a note to verify the alibi. Did Dr. Adebayo mention any other problems he was having? Anyone who might have wanted to harm him? Tyler shook his head. No, nothing like that. Emmanuel he was a good man. Complicated, yeah, but good. He didn't deserve what happened to him. As Osei prepared to leave, Tyler called out to him. Detective, there's something else you should know. Osei turned back, eyebrows raised. Emmanuel, he was worried about something. The last few weeks he seemed distracted, anxious. When I asked him about it, he just said it was work stuff. But I got the feeling it was more than that. Osei nodded, adding this to his notes. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. As he left the flat, Osei's mind was whirling. He pulled out his phone to call Clark. This changed everything. Not only did they have a potential motive for Amara Adebayo, but there was also the question of what had been worrying Emmanuel in the weeks leading up to his death. The case was growing more complex by the hour, and Osei had a feeling they were only scratching the surface of the secrets hidden within the Adebayo family. What he didn't know was that across town, Amara Adebayo was making a frantic phone call of her own, one that would add yet another layer to this already tangled web of deceit and betrayal. Amara Adebayo paced the length of her designer living room, phone pressed to her ear, her usually impeccable appearance disheveled. Pick up, she muttered, her free hand clenched into a fist. Finally, the call connected. Amara, what's wrong? The voice on the other end was male, concerned. Julian, we have a problem, Amara hissed, her eyes darting to the windows, as if expecting to see police cars pulling up at any moment. The police have been asking questions. I think they know about Emmanuel's extracurricular activities. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. How much do they know? I'm not sure, Amara replied, sinking onto the plush sofa. But they're digging. It's only a matter of time before they uncover everything. Calm down. Julian's voice was steady, authoritative. We knew this was a possibility. Stick to the plan. You don't know anything about Emmanuel's dealings, understand? You're just the grieving widow. Amara laughed bitterly. Grieving? If they find out what he was really up to, what we were planning, Julian, I can't go to prison. I won't. You won't have to, Julian assured her. We've covered our tracks. As long as you keep your cool, there's no way they can connect us to any of it. Remember, Amara, you're the victim here. Emmanuel was the one leading a double life. As Amara ended the call, she didn't notice the shadow that passed by the living room window. Outside, Detective Inspector Olivia Clark lowered her binoculars, a grim smile on her face. The lip-reading course she'd taken years ago was finally paying off. She pulled out her phone, dialing Osei. Isaac, I need you to run a background check on someone named Julian. No last name yet, but he seems to be close to Amara Adebayo, and get a warrant for Amara's phone records. I think we've just stumbled onto something big. Back inside, Amara stood before the large mirror in the hallway, schooling her features into a mask of grief and innocence. She was a master of deception for years, but as she stared at her reflection, she wondered how much longer she could keep up the charade. Her mind drifted back to the moment, 3 years ago, when her perfect life had begun to unravel. Amara hummed to herself as she tidied Emmanuel's home office. Her husband was working late again, and she'd taken it upon herself to organize his cluttered desk. As she sorted through papers, a small, unmarked envelope caught her eye. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. Inside was a USB drive. Frowning, she plugged it into Emmanuel's computer. What she found made her blood run cold. Financial records, offshore accounts, emails discussing shipments and product. It didn't take a genius to realize that her respectable, successful husband was involved in something illegal. And from the looks of it, it was big. For days, she grappled with the knowledge. Should she confront him? Go to the police? But then another thought occurred to her. If Emmanuel could lead a double life, why couldn't she? It was then that she reached out to Julian, an old friend from university who now worked in cybersecurity. Together, they hatched a plan, one that would free Amara from her fraudulent marriage and set her up for life. Amara blinked, coming back to the present. The plan had been perfect. Emmanuel's illegal activities provided the leverage she needed, and Julian's expertise ensured they wouldn't get caught. They would siphon off funds, gather evidence, and when the time was right, Amara would turn Emmanuel in, playing the shocked and betrayed wife. But now Emmanuel was dead, and their carefully constructed plan was crumbling around her. As she moved away from the mirror, Amara's heel caught on the edge of the rug. She stumbled, catching herself on a side table. A framed photo crashed to the floor, the glass shattering. Amara bent to pick it up, her hands shaking. It was a family portrait from happier times. Her, Emmanuel, and Zara, all smiles at Zara's graduation. A wave of guilt washed over her. In all her plotting and planning, she'd never stopped to consider the impact on her daughter. But it was too late for regrets now. She had to stay focused, had to keep playing her part. Because if the truth came out, it wouldn't just be her life on the line. It would destroy everything and everyone she'd ever cared about. Little did Amara know, the truth had a way of revealing itself, no matter how deeply it was buried. And as Detective Clark pieced together the clues, she was getting closer to unraveling the complex web of lies that surrounded the Adebayo family. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of their carefully constructed world. But the biggest shock was yet to come. A revelation that would change everything and force each member of this fractured family to face the consequences of their actions. Zara Adebayo sat in a quiet corner of her favorite campus cafe, her untouched latte growing cold before her. Her phone buzzed insistently, the screen lighting up with a familiar name, Tyler. She silenced it, her heart racing. How had everything gone so wrong? Just a few months ago, her life had been perfect. She was excelling in her studies, making her parents proud, and had even started dating Tyler, a charming personal trainer she'd met at her father's gym. But then she'd discovered the truth, and her world had shattered. Zara hummed happily as she let herself into Tyler's flat. They'd been dating for 2 months, and she'd finally worked up the courage to surprise him at home. She had it all planned, a home-cooked meal, maybe some wine, and then the sound of voices stopped her in her tracks. One was Tyler's, but the other, her blood ran cold. It couldn't be. Peering around the corner, she saw them. Tyler and her father, Emmanuel, locked in an intimate embrace. Zara fled, her mind reeling. It had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew what she'd seen. For days, she agonized over what to do. Confront them? Tell her mother? In the end, she did nothing, hoping that if she ignored it, somehow it would go away. But it didn't. Instead, she watched as her father grew more distant, as tension built between her parents. And Tyler kept calling, texting, acting as if nothing had changed. The buzz of her phone jolted Zara back to the present. This time, it wasn't Tyler. It was Detective Clark. Zara? It's Detective Inspector Clark. I need to speak with you urgently. Can you come to the station? Zara's mouth went dry. Is everything okay? I'm afraid not. Clark's voice was grave. We've uncovered some new information about your father's death, and I think you might be able to help us make sense of it. As Zara gathered her things, her mind raced. What did they know? Had they discovered her father's relationship with Tyler? Or was it something else entirely? Across town, in an unmarked police car, Detective Sergeant Osei was engaged in his own revelation. You're sure about this? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Positive, came the reply from the forensics lab. The DNA under Dr. Adebayo's fingernails? It's a familial match to both him and his wife. But it's not Amara's DNA. Osei's mind whirled. So you're saying? Yes, the lab tech confirmed. The DNA belongs to Dr. Adebayo's child, his daughter, Zara. As Osei ended the call, he turned to Clark, who had been listening intently. What do we do now? He asked. Clark's face was grim. Now, we get the truth, all of it, no matter how ugly it might be. Meanwhile, in her luxurious home, Amara Adebayo received a text message that made her blood run cold. It was from Julian. They know about Zara, Plan B, now. As the pieces of this twisted puzzle began to fall into place, none of the players realized just how high the stakes had become. The truth was racing towards them all, threatening to destroy everything in its path. And at the center of it all was Zara, carrying a secret that could shatter what remained of her family forever. Detective Inspector Olivia Clark sat across from Zara Adebayo in the stark interrogation room, her eyes fixed on the young woman's trembling hands. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Zara, Clark began gently, we know you were at the Oakwood Hotel the day your father died. Zara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. How? We found your DNA at the scene, Clark explained, under your father's fingernails. The color drained from Zara's face. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, tears welling in her eyes. This is your chance to tell us what really happened, Clark pressed. We know about your father's relationship with Tyler Johnson. We know about the arguments, the secrets. What we don't know is why you were there that day. Zara's composure crumbled. I never meant for any of this to happen, she sobbed. I just wanted it to stop, all the lies, the sneaking around. I thought if I confronted Dad, made him see how much he was hurting everyone. As Zara's story poured out, Clark and Osei exchanged glances. The picture that emerged was one of a family torn apart by secrets and betrayal. Zara had gone to the hotel to confront her father, to beg him to end his affair with Tyler and come clean to her mother. But when she arrived, she found Emmanuel already arguing with Tyler. Tyler was breaking it off, Zara explained, her voice barely above a whisper. He said he couldn't do it anymore, couldn't keep lying to me. Dad lost it. He grabbed Tyler, started shaking him. I'd never seen him like that before. In the heat of the moment, Zara had revealed herself, shocking both men. What followed was a chaotic confrontation, with accusations and revelations flying. Dad turned on me, Zara continued, her voice shaking. He said I had no right to judge him, that I didn't understand the pressures he was under. He talked about money problems, about people who would hurt us if he didn't do what they wanted. It didn't make any sense. As Emmanuel grew more agitated, he lashed out, grabbing Zara's arm. In the struggle, she had scratched him, drawing blood, explaining the DNA evidence. Tyler tried to intervene, Zara said. He pushed Dad away from me. There was a scuffle, and then Dad just collapsed. Tyler checked his pulse, said he wasn't breathing. We panicked. Tyler said we should leave, that no one would believe it was an accident, so we ran. Clark leaned back, her mind racing. Zara, why didn't you come forward with this information earlier? Zara looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance. Because I overheard Mom on the phone that night. She was talking to someone named Julian, saying that everything had gone wrong, that they needed a new plan. I realized she might have had something to do with Dad's death. I was trying to protect her. As Clark digested this new information, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the forensics team. Toxicology report on Emmanuel Adebayo complete. High levels of potassium chloride found in the system, consistent with induced cardiac arrest. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined. Across town, Amara Adebayo was throwing clothes into a suitcase, her movements frantic. Her phone rang, Julian again. The police know everything, she hissed as soon as she answered. We need to leave now. Calm down, Julian's voice was steady. Remember the contingency plan. I've booked us on a flight too. The line went dead as the door to Amara's bedroom burst open. Detective Sergeant Osei stood there, flanked by uniformed officers. Amara Adebayo, he said, his voice firm. You're under arrest for the murder of Emmanuel Adebayo and conspiracy to commit fraud. As Amara was led away in handcuffs, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, she caught sight of her reflection in the hallway mirror. The face that stared back at her was one she barely recognized, a woman who had lost everything in her pursuit of freedom and wealth. Back at the station, Clark sat at her desk, piecing together the final strands of this tangled web. Emmanuel Adebayo, respected doctor by day, involved in a complex money laundering scheme by night. Amara, the wife who discovered his secret and plotted her own escape. Tyler, the lover caught in the middle. And Zara, an innocent pawn in a game she never asked to play. The truth, as always, had proven stranger than fiction. A family destroyed by greed, lust, and the weight of too many secrets. As Clark prepared to close the case file, she couldn't help but wonder, in a story with no true heroes, who really wins? The Adebayo family's perfect facade had been shattered, revealing the rot that had festered beneath. And in the end, the price of their secrets had been paid in blood. 6 months after the arrest of Amara Adebayo, the courtroom was packed as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. The trial had captivated London, laying bare the sordid details of what the press had dubbed the Willow Lane scandal. Zara sat in the front row, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Beside her was Tyler, his presence a source of both comfort and painful reminder. They had reconciled in the wake of the tragedy, bound together by shared guilt and the need for understanding. As the judge spoke, detailing the charges and the evidence presented, Zara's mind drifted. 1 month earlier, Zara stood before her father's grave, a solitary figure in the misty London cemetery. She placed a single white rose on the headstone, her hand lingering on the cold marble. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I'm sorry for all of it." A hand on her shoulder made her turn. Detective Inspector Clark stood there, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and something else, understanding, perhaps. "How are you holding up?" Clark asked softly. Zara managed a weak smile. "I'm surviving. Some days are harder than others." Clark nodded. "I wanted you to know, we've finished our investigation into your father's business dealings. It seems he was being blackmailed into participating in the money laundering scheme. He was trying to find a way out to protect you and your mother." Zara's eyes widened. "So he wasn't a willing participant?" "It appears not," Clark confirmed. "Your father made some mistakes, Zara, but in the end, he was trying to do the right thing." As Clark walked away, Zara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It didn't erase the pain or the guilt, but it offered a glimmer of understanding, a chance to remember her father as the man she had always believed him to be. Present day, the judge's voice brought Zara back to the present. "Find the defendant, Amara Adebayo, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Zara's eyes locked with her mother's for a brief moment. In that gaze, she saw a flicker of the woman she once knew, regretful, scared, but also relieved. The web of lies had finally been untangled. As Amara was led away, Zara felt Tyler's hand slip into hers. She squeezed it, drawing strength from his presence. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Detective Inspector Clark stood before the microphones, her face solemn. "Today, justice has been served," she began. "But let this case serve as a reminder that secrets and lies have the power to destroy lives. The Adebayo family's tragedy is a cautionary tale for us all." Later that evening, Zara stood on the balcony of her new flat, looking out over the London skyline. The city lights twinkled, a stark contrast to the darkness she had navigated over the past months. Tyler joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "What now?" he asked softly. Zara took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs. "Now, we heal. We move forward. We try to build something good from all of this pain." As they stood there, embracing under the stars, Zara thought about the long road ahead. The journey of forgiveness, not just for her parents or Tyler, but for herself. The process of rebuilding trust, of learning to love without fear. It wouldn't be easy. The scars of betrayal and loss would take time to fade. But for the first time in months, Zara felt a flicker of hope. The truth, painful as it had been, had set them all free. In the end, the story of the Adebayo family served as a powerful reminder of the complexities of human nature, the capacity for both great love and devastating betrayal. It was a tale of secrets and lies, of dreams corrupted and innocence lost. But it was also a story of resilience, of the strength found in facing hard truths and the possibility of redemption. As the city hummed below them, Zara and Tyler looked to the future, uncertain but facing it together. The perfect family of Willow Lane was gone, but from its ashes a new kind of family was emerging. One built on honesty, forgiveness, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving life's darkest storms.